Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing fabulously well. And I just want to thank you so much. I know I keep saying this, but really some of the compliments that are coming through about the stories you're listening to on the channel are just so incredible. You've just really inspired me so much. Thank you so much for all those lovely comments. Keep them coming in, and do tell me about yourself, what you drink and stuff like that, because I always find that so fascinating. So before we get started, don't forget to go and get that quintessential drink, because you know you need it, especially if you've got a good story coming up. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, he was poles apart from all the other doctors I'd ever visited. He looked at health from an entirely different perspective. He had come highly recommended by a friend of mine, who found his inspirational alternative remedies to healthcare refreshing. He didn't always bring out his script and scribble out a bunch of medications for you that would likely earn him some commission from Big Pharma. On the contrary, he wanted to treat you in a holistic manner. Look, Mr. Huckleby, I'm not going to beat about the bush. I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I've been looking at your X-ray results. They don't look terribly good. One of your lungs is not functional, so you're literally operating on one lung. I can see that your lung health is seriously compromised, and this presents a rather big problem for me. I rubbed my moustache awkwardly. You're not saying anything new, Doc. I've actually seen hundreds of doctors telling me exactly the same thing that you are. It seems nothing is helping. My breathing condition is getting worse every single day. Sometimes I can't even sleep at night because I'm coughing so much. Other times I quite literally struggle to breathe. I feel like a clogged-up chimney that's suffocating from the inside out, if you get my drift. Frankly, Doctor, I'm scared. If I carry on like this, I'm afraid that I might not wake up one day. I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Huckleberry. I couldn't have said it better myself. I can see you're not in denial about the gravity of your problem. He pointed to the X-ray of my lungs with his pencil. As you can see here, you have a great deal of mucus accumulating in your lungs. I'm going to advise you to make a phenomenal natural concoction that rarely works miraculously to clear the lungs. I want you to boil the skins of 3 lemons and 3 grapefruits for about 3 hours, covering the skins with a little water. This secret concoction is known as quinine. You can freeze it in batches for your personal use. I would like you to drink 1 tablespoon of this mixture 3 times a day. It works wonders for mucus. In fact, it's great for all kinds of respiratory illnesses, viruses and infections. I'll give it a go, Doctor, I said, looking at him rather dubiously, with a raised, cynical brow. This was the first doctor giving me a natural remedy. Most wanted to place me on hundreds of medications, none of which have worked at all. This was a whole new approach. How long have you lived in Chicago, Mr. Huckleberry? The doctor asked me quizzically. My entire life, Doc. I was born and raised here, but I failed to see what that's got to do with my lung health. It has everything to do with your lung health, Mr. Huckleberry. Absolutely everything. Look around you. High-rise buildings everywhere. The air of the city is contaminated, polluted, congested by car fumes, cigarette smoke, allergens, other occupational contaminants, and of course hazards everywhere that potentially irritate the airways of your lung, causing coughing, wheezing, strokes, heart attacks or even cancer. Not good for a man in your position, functioning only on a single lung. Bearing that all in mind, Mr. Huckleberry, we are also not close to nature here in Chicago, apart from the beach area around Lake Michigan. You have got to go an hour and a half outside of the city to places like Fox River to get some good, clean air. My advice to you is to get out of the city, go and live somewhere further afield, where you have copious amounts of fresh air. I will promise you this, Mr. Huckleberry, you will be able to breathe again,
You will live longer, regain your health. You have everything to gain, nothing to lose. In my opinion, it's a no-brainer for you."
"But are you sure fresh air makes such a difference, Doc?"
"Without a doubt. Do you know in the Blue Mountains in Australia, there are a plethora of centenarians living out there, and it's all due to the eucalyptus vapour and the fresh mountain air. Very, very significant for your health. Might I also suggest an infusion of eucalyptus oil in your home at night? It helps open up the airwaves. You just need a vaporizer and some genuine eucalyptus oil. You can order that online. I have here a booklet of breathing exercises I'd like you to follow. Breathing, Mr. Huckleberry. It's the essence of life."
I had visited that doctor 5 years ago, following his advice to the T, never looking back, not even once, with an ounce of regret. That doctor had been absolutely right about everything. The miracle concoction made from grapefruit had literally cleared my lungs up within the first 10 days. I take it now every day of my life, as it efficiently clears the mucus away. I no longer cough or have sleepless nights anymore. But it was moving out of the city that certainly enabled me to breathe again. The issues with my lungs had now become a thing of the past. It had not been difficult to leave my old life in Chicago behind. As I was of retirement age, I didn't have much baggage, had zero interest in material possessions, no children or grandchildren to speak of. Furthermore, my wife had tragically died 5 years prior from a diabetic coma. In truth, it hadn't even crossed my mind to live anywhere else in the world except Chicago. I suppose it was all that I'd ever actually known. But I had nothing to lose moving away from the big city. It had been the best decision I had ever made. Besides, Chicago is incredibly flat, really rather like Amsterdam and Holland, so it certainly was great to embrace some mountainous terrain for a change. I knew I wouldn't miss the political corruption there either, or the rising level of crime in the city, for gangland shootings had become pretty commonplace. That being said, I would almost certainly miss all my friends, along with Chicago's amazing food that had been responsible for the rising level of obesity in the city, with some of the guiltiest offenders being Chicago's deep dish pizza, Chicago's Vienna beef dog, Italian beef sandwiches, and Garrett's gourmet popcorn in a plethora of different flavours. So many more delicious foods that were all guilty as charged. I had done a great deal of research online, discovering a rustic cabin for sale in the woods in southeastern Missouri, part of the Ozark foothills, not far from the city of Piedmont. "The name's Huckleberry, Tom Huckleberry," I told the estate agent. "I'm phoning from Chicago. I'd like to put an offer in for the cabin in the woods, on the Ozark foothills." "But should you not see it first, Mr. Huckleberry?
I'm going to be brutally honest with you, but the cabin is incredibly remote. It's off-grid, very, very basic. It's been on the market for a long time. No one has snatched it up yet." "That does not matter," I insisted. "I want the place."
"But Mr. Huckleberry, I want to assure you, this isn't the first time someone like you from a metropolitan city like Chicago has recklessly brought a cabin like this off the cuff, without even seeing it first. Now, I strongly don't recommend you do this. Now, I want to tell you the last time this happened to me, the impetuous man purchased the cabin from me, ended up screaming like a banshee when he realised it was off-grid, miles away from the nearest town, literally in the middle of nowhere. Of course, Mr. Huckleberry, he claimed that I hadn't informed him of these crucial facts, which was certainly far from the truth. I regret to say he was rather impulsive like you are. He made my life a living hell, claiming that I'd hoodwinked him into buying the place. The truth was, he couldn't hack the isolation, the loneliness of the Badlands. You see, for many city dwellers like you, it's a pipe dream to move to a remote area, and then to buy a cabin in the woods. But when they get here, they often flounder, and are improficient at coping with the wilderness. Let's not kid. It's a far cry away from living in a sprawling metropolis with art, culture, fabulous restaurants. It's a world away from all that, and a lonely one at that, Mr. Huckleberry. Your interest in this cabin certainly raises alarm bells for me.
along with an airy feeling of déjà vu. You're clearly acquainted with city life, but living out in the wilderness, it's a different ballgame, which is why I'm very reluctant to agree to the sale. I realise all that, I assure you, but I have no intentions of giving you any grief about this. I do know what I'm doing. I really want to buy the cabin."
"If you're sure," came the woman's vacillating voice on the other end of the line. "But you cannot say that I didn't warn you, Mr. Huckleberry. I don't want you coming down on me like a ton of bricks if you're desperately disappointed in your purchase."
"Of course I wouldn't do that. That would never happen. Forgive me for saying this, Miss... It's Mrs. Fernando. Forgive me for saying this, Mrs. Fernando, but isn't it your job as an estate agent to actually encourage people to buy property, rather than to warn them off it?"
"Mr. Huckleberry, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't completely forthright with you. If you want to know why the original owner actually sold the previous place, I'll tell you. I'll be brutally honest with you, in fact. If you must know, he claimed he had a one-on-one encounter with a Bigfoot. The creature was absolutely enormous. It terrified the living daylights out of him, which was why he packed up and sold the cabin. He said he couldn't continue living out there, knowing a monstrous creature like that was loitering around. You see, Mr. Huckleberry, there are things out there in the forest, things that a city dweller like you could not even begin to fathom or comprehend. You see, I know about these things. I've lived in this part of the world all my life. I've learnt about them, heard bizarre, insane, crazy stories that would make your hair curl."
"Bigfoot," I said, rolling the words on my tongue like a lozenge, with a peculiar flavour that I was trying to identify. "Bigfoot."
"Yes, Bigfoot. You can laugh as much as you like, make fun of me, ridicule me if you like, but I'm warning you, Mr. Huckleberry. There are indeed formidable creatures like Bigfoot roaming around those woods."
"Why would I laugh at you? I have no reason to doubt your claims. If you say the previous owner of the cabin sold up shop due to an encounter with a Bigfoot, I'm rather inclined to believe you."
"So do you still want to buy the cabin, then?"
"Of course I want to buy the cabin. I'm not going to let an outlandish sighting of a Bigfoot scare me off. That would be very, very stupid."
"Very well. I can see, Mr. Huckleberry, that you are stubborn, headstrong, pertinacious. I hope you don't live to regret your decision. But congratulations are in order. After the paperwork is complete, I'm delighted to inform you that the cabin is officially yours." I hadn't wasted a moment of time. Within a few days I'd moved into the cabin. The estate agent was absolutely right. It really was a whole world away from my former suburban abode, a rented apartment in the bustling metro area of Chicago, with its honking taxicabs, bright lights and boisterous crowds of people rushing to and from work. In truth, the moment that I laid eyes on my new rural abode, it was love at first sight. There are no words adequate enough to describe its ineffaceable, unpolished beauty, its rugged, unembellished simplicity, its rustic, Arcadian charm, its unassuming, down-to-earth, indigenous allure. The cabin looked as if it belonged with the trees, the sky, the mountainous views, as if it too had burst forth through the earth, rather like a wild flower in the valley. It possessed that easy-going, laid-back, trusting ambience, like a non-judgmental, unconditionally loving grandmother, that welcomed you into her space with open arms. As I was saying, this homespun piece of natural art, built meticulously by a carpenter's creative fair hands, blended into the wood as seamlessly as the surrounding trees, fauna and flora. I even ran my hands around the cabin, to feel the age-old beams, for I felt so connected to everything. It was all so alive, so natural, so unblemished. The cabin was nestled on a grassy clearing in the woods, surrounded on every side by sprawling forest, with of course the exception of its frontage that overlooked a small pebbly beach, and a stream that meandered through the valley, with a feisty rambunctious current, where clouds of white foaming water jetted over sculptural outcrops and voluptuous shapely boulders.
In the far distant horizon, you could see the rise and fall of the soft silhouettes of the shadowy mountains, dappling the furthest corners of the ether in splashes of purples, blues and greys, set against the vast unending expanse of the cobalt blue sky. Could anything in this world be more beguiling? I had brought with me some simple furnishings, which included my bed, a kitchen table, chairs, a walnut dresser, a couple of comfortable settees, a recliner, a collection of warm rugs, a desk, and of course some outdoor furniture for the wraparound wooden porch. I was fortunate to have a gas cooker, oven, gas refrigerator, along with solar grid energy, and a natural water supply from the stream. I had decided to live my new life as simplistically as I could, which was a decision I never regretted to date. I would visit the town in my truck twice a month to gather supplies, to have hot water for a shower, visit a launderette or a hairdresser. Otherwise I would fish and hunt in the woods quite regularly. The latter became something I began to really enjoy. You would invariably think that I would become lonely, but not at all. I was always the kind of person that thoroughly enjoyed my own company, revelling in the stillness, solitude and peace of the natural world, often reading fictional novels well into the early hours of the morning. The verdurous woods around the cabin were absolutely mesmerising, the sort of place that took your breath away, a conglomerate of individualised species of trees gathered together like old friends, including white oaks, short-leaf pines, cottonwoods and silver birches, that swept up unabashedly into the sky, like whopping, viridescent skyscrapers. It was like stepping into another realm or room, if you like, a shaded, tranquil retreat, entertaining your senses with musical birdsong, along with visual displays of lacy ferns and flourishing luxuriant ground covers. Then there were tree trunks, branches, twigs and stones, scattered liberally across the forest, like pieces of indigenous art, made all the more bedazzling by the moss that swathed everything in sprinklings of verdant, fairy dust. One day as I was gathering pieces of dry wood together to make a sizable collection of firewood for the coming winter, I sensed that something was watching me, but what it was, I couldn't imagine. I knew this instinctively, as living alone meant I instantaneously perceived that someone had most certainly invaded my private space. It was a feeling that greatly unsettled me, made all the worse by the fact that I couldn't identify my observer. It unnerved me, sending ominous prickles down my spine, like sharp electric shocks. I stumbled upon an area that demanded my attention, as long thin saplings were bent with deliberate creativity, some twisted over into arches, while others were snapped in some kind of symbolic alignment or figurative arrangement that suggested to me that it was a signature or message that was written in timber. On my close approach to this spot, that was when I heard a loud snoring sound, the kind that would invariably force a marital partner to have to sleep in another room. It possessed a deep, throaty, nasal resonance. This was when I realised someone was on my property. I imagined it had to be a homeless vagrant sleeping rough. My curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled away the saplings to get a clearer look. I was to discover that behind the bent trees was a flattened clearing, almost like a large nest, covered in folded grass. I could see a colossal heap of grey bedraggled hair, lying sprawled across the ground, rather like a lumpy sleeping bag. This humongous wad of hair was the snoring offender. Sitting next to the sleeping adult was a small creature, about 3 foot tall, playing with acorns, rather like you or I might play a game of marbles. This must have been the little creature that had been staring at me. I knew at once that these outlandish creatures were Bigfoots. The little creature looked up at me. It was small, thin and lanky, covered in long brown hair, with the cutest eyes I've ever seen. They twinkled with a mischievous humour, curiosity, and a warm, open friendliness. I was so stunned I quickly moved away, hardly daring to believe what I'd stumbled upon. What must have been a Bigfoot nursery, I assumed, but the adult on babysitting duty was fast asleep, obliviously unaware of my presence, and I wanted to keep it that way. I quickly walked away, feeling a rising level of trepidation, as judging by the size of the large Bigfoot lying passed out, I dreaded to imagine the size of the thing should it actually stand straight up. As I walked away to my cabin, the little Bigfoot began to follow me home, keeping a wary distance away from me. I was practically begging it to return to its mother by indicating that it should go back from whence it came. But this balmy creature wasn't having any of it. It parked itself outside my cabin from a distance away, watching me chopping wood. It then left and went away. I breathed a huge sigh of relief, so thankful that it had finally gone, hoping with all my heart that it wasn't coming back any time soon. The last thing I wanted was to make an adult Bigfoot angry. But day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, the baby Bigfoot would visit me regularly, watching me from a distance of about 6 foot away. In the years that followed, he became bigger and bigger and bigger, until he wasn't small any more. But the growth was so subtle and obscure to me that I barely noticed it at all, until one day I remember looking at him and thinking, "My God, if I didn't know you, you would frighten the life out of me." For at that time he was about 7 foot tall, 600 pounds and 3 foot wide across the shoulder area, with overlong arms and an uncannily human face. Sometimes the creature would make me laugh by imitating what I was doing. His imitations of me were so comical, I would burst out laughing. The more I laughed, the more the creature enjoyed performing for me. He was a natural actor, revelling in all the attention I gave him. He often enacted some interesting acrobatic stunts that would take years in the gym for the average gymnast to accomplish, but he did this with a flawless fluidity. I often threw bags of salted chips for him, or peanuts or pieces of bacon, as the creature craved salt. I noticed when the Bigfoot didn't visit me, I would actually feel sad. He had become like a constant companion to me. I gave him the name Hercules because he was so strong and powerful. One night, as I was tucked up in bed reading a cosy novel under the light of my kerosene lantern, I suddenly heard a loud banging sound at the cabin door. Then it was flung open so violently, as cool air just wafted through the cabin. In the dark shadows I saw the silhouette of a hefty, burly, bald-headed man with a very thick neck and a sizable body that had obviously been acquired from heavy-duty workouts in the gym. He was standing yards away from me, leering at me with a vindictive expression on his face that left me quaking and shaking in my boots. I noticed at once that he was wearing prison scrubs, so it didn't take a rocket scientist to establish that he was an escaped convict. At that time I had no way of knowing that he had murdered 2 prison guards while being relocated from one prison to another. He was staring at me with a frenzied look, like a rabid dog, that gave me the distinct impression he was unhinged. My eyes darted from his murderous eyes to the staggeringly sharp knife he was holding in his hands. "Out of bed, old man!" he commanded, holding the knife to my throat, cutting into my skin so that I could feel the trails of blood trickling down my neck. I knew instinctively this man meant business. What do you want?" I stammered. "Some food for a start would be very nice. I haven't eaten for many days. If you do everything I tell you to do, I will not hurt you. I need a truck, rifle, and plenty of money." "I never keep cash here in my cabin." "Well, you can give me your cash point number, can you not? I will evacuate the funds myself. Of course, I will have to keep you tied up here in the cabin indefinitely until I've got as much money as I need. Isn't that a bit extreme? Get up! I told you, I'm half-starved. Cook me a meal now. It would help if you'd stop holding that knife against my neck. Take me to your refrigerator. What have you got for me to eat?" I picked up the kerosene lamp, walking over to my small kitchenette, where I opened the refrigerator, feeling all the while the cold edge of the steel blade biting against my neck. Once again I could feel water trickling down my neck that I knew immediately was blood. I scanned the refrigerator. I've got eggs, bacon, beef patties, baked beans. Get on with it then. Start cooking. I began to size up my quarry. Granted, I was in my 70s. This man was easily 40 years my junior. Much stronger than I was too. But I was pretty certain that once he'd gotten everything he needed from me, then he would murder me. In fact, if you stopped to think about it, He would gain everything if he stayed here on my plot of land. It would be easy for him to get my PIN number from me, murder me, and live the rest of his days here in this remote cabin, without anyone ever finding him. It was not in his interest to keep me alive at all. I knew I needed to do something, but what? I couldn't even begin to imagine. The following morning, the man commanded me to get some water from the stream, following me with his rifle. As I was placing my bucket into the flowing water, I caught sight of Hercules, who was hiding in plain sight behind the trees, clearly aware that something was really off this morning. He knew I never entertained guests, so he moved ever closer towards me, watching me intently, remaining in the shadows. That was when he saw the man placing the rifle against my head. He ascertained that I was almost certainly in trouble. All of a sudden I could hear a whistle. A while later it was followed by an answer, another whistle. I knew it was my friend calling for reinforcements. What seemed only like moments later, two monstrous creatures came thundering towards us. The ground literally heaved and groaned as heavy feet pounded the earthen floor. The prison convict who was watching me collect the water in the bucket turned around to see what was making that commotion. He could not believe what he was observing, as two gigantic Bigfoot bounded towards him like lions ambushing their prey. To an unknown observer, you would have been in no doubt that this man's life hung before him precariously like a thread on a spider's web. The man screamed, "Oh my God! A Bigfoot! A Bigfoot!" He trembled like a quaking aspen tree. "Bloody hell! A Bigfoot! Oh my God! Help! Help! Help!" he shrieked. He trembled so violently, trying to aim the rifle at Hercules, but he couldn't even hold it straight as he was shaking so much, and the bullets went ricocheting across the ground, failing superbly at meeting their targets. Hercules seized the man in his arms. I was so stunned how tiny he looked in Hercules' charge, which really made me appreciate just how huge my friend actually was. The man frantically tried to escape, oscillating his arms backwards and forwards, screaming for help. "Help! Help! Why don't you help me? Help me!" Hercules tossed the man in the air, caught him, then aiming for a treacherous rocky outcrop in the water, he flung the man in the air, where for a moment he took flight and then went plummeting towards the rocky outcrop. I heard a mighty crash as my oppressor's head was violently bludgeoned against a jagged rock. His skull cracked open like an egg. Globs of blood, brain matter and pieces of scalp with hair still attached to it floated down the stream. The man's limp body was flung backwards into the water, transforming it into a bright crimson colour. I saw the corpse floating in the water like a mannequin, the eyes lifeless and glazed over, left to the mercy of the rigorous current. I am afraid I had no empathy for this awful man. I realised the large Bigfoot who'd accompanied Hercules was the same creature I'd saw babysitting him all those years ago in the Bigfoot nursery, who had fallen asleep, snoring loudly. I could perceive she was a grandmother figure, who was exceedingly protective over her grandson. She looked at me with warm, kind eyes, and then glided away into the heart of the forest. Hercules, however, did not budge, but spent the next few days watching over me vigilantly, rather like a protective guard dog, ever concerned that another offender might try to harm me. A few days later, I tuned into my radio to listen to the news. An ex-prison convict, Tyler Hughes, escaped from prison a few days ago, and is responsible for the heinous murder of 2 prison officers, which occurred when Tyler was being transported to another prison. He was found lying dead by a couple of hikers today, floating in a stream. It appears that he had sustained a blunt force injury to the head, but the reason for his death remains unknown. Officer Angus Levington said he felt no sympathy for the violent thug, who had been responsible for killing 2 of his very best friends, who he describes as exemplary officers that were an asset to the force. "I've been in the force for over 10 years. I believe some people are born evil. He is one of those people, evil to the core. The world is a better place without him." Mrs. Hughes, who was estranged from her son 20 years ago, said she held little remorse over her son's death. She told the papers today that when growing up, he killed her beloved spaniels just for a joke by shoving them in plastic bags and throwing them in the lake because she refused to buy him an ice cream. I knew after that incident, she told the paper, that my son was a bad egg. I was always a good mother, but that boy was born evil. Hughes was sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal murder of his girlfriend when she called off the relationship after being subject to his tireless abuse. As you can imagine, when I realised what this odious, awful man had done, I was even more convinced that he would have murdered me if given the chance. Hercules no longer lives on my property, as he's partnered with a new mate, but on occasion he passes through my neck of the woods to say hello. He introduced me to his female partner once. She is so reticent and kept peeking at me from behind the tree and hiding away. She appeared painfully shy. Hercules is now a proud father of 2 little Bigfoot that I was privy to meeting, and they weren't as shy as their mother. I still live on my own in the heart of the American wilderness, and would never have it any other way. But as for having any lung problems, those wee issues from the past have all but gone, as the fresh air has changed my life, along with a fabulous concoction made from lemon and grapefruit that I highly recommend to anyone suffering from lung issues, colds, viruses and infections. So there you are. That's my story. Well, if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and also click the thumbs up. Until next time, goodbye and good night.